Hello, I'm Jim Hatch. I'm the Chief Technical Officer for Insurity. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the future of technology in the property casualty industry and how we are looking at reacting to that and what we think are the important things that folks in the industry need to pay attention to over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. The first thing I want to get to is technology prediction is a really difficult thing. If you look at this, back in 1956, somebody told us that we'd have flying cars in 1965. Well, we don't have a flying car. But if you think about it, today we have things that we never would have thought about before. We're sitting out here and we can do 3D printing, we can do a computer in your pocket. You can read a book on a phone. You can actually talk on a cell phone that you carry in your pocket now as well. But it's one of those things that it's tough to really come through and say this is what's going to happen. But this is a best guess of what's coming back through the industry. A couple of years ago, Intel did a kind of an assessment of what's happening out there in the world, how companies are going to react, and it applies to insurance industries as well. And what they were looking at, and they're saying there are demographic changes that are occurring where people are starting to work from different places, people are working a little differently when they do work, and their expectations of how they work are different. And then the relationships between those people, their jobs and the companies that all kind of form a loose confederation of talents, of resources, and of objectives. And it's that kind of confederation of things that are coming together that we call the connected enterprise. Intel didn't call it that back then, but that's what they were seeing. And so what we're seeing now in that connected enterprise are things like social media are becoming a huge issue. Cloud technology, mobile technology, and then there's a couple of things that are kind of cryptic. There's this kind of area called the machine, which for the rest of us, we look at that as that Internet of Things that's coming up now. And then there's all of the things that happen within the organization that are the turn the crank parts of the organization, where we are by and large just making sure that the basic building blocks of the organization's functions work, and that we continue to produce. In our case, we produce policies, we pay claims, we take care of the insureds. So we'll talk a little bit about how all that stuff kind of fits together here. It all comes together through what we call a collaboration model. Most folks are looking at things as a group of other things. And it's technology, it's people, it's different places. You're seeing things happening in homes, you're seeing things happen in cars, you're seeing an integration of data sources and of objectives and the way things work together now that we never did before. But if you take a look and a step back and you say, okay, how does that apply to me? How does that work for my organization? And it's a change in where we've put our focus. Over the past 10 or 15 years, we've been looking at technologies and at systems that we could boost personal productivity so that somebody would be better at their job. So if you're better at your job and I'm better at my job and everybody else is better at their jobs, the whole organization is going to be better at achieving its mission. So we look at that and we say, is that really where we're still heading? Are we still trying to eke out more and more efficiencies out of people and what they're doing for a living? And that's not the case anymore. We've kind of milked that channel of improvement dry, so to speak. You look at what's going on in the industry, and the industry has said, we have to step back now and say, now that we've got all these people with all these tools and we have all these kinds of technologies around and they're all kind of disparate and we're now starting to bring them together, how do we make the organization now more productive? How do we get away from simply looking at the individual and the organization as a sum of the individual parts into what does the organization do in terms of meeting its own goals and as in terms of trying to be a gestalt of all of those things. So we look out there in the industry and we look at it and say, if the future in fact is collaboration, it's really broad, it's wide open. You're going to see collaboration explode. Back in 2013, the Connected Enterprise Survey came out and said, hey, look, by and large, people have a lot of connections. The average business user has almost had, in 2013, 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, had 1,800 connections in their network. They're expected to have over 2,700, nearly a 50% increase in their connections in only 2 years. How does that explode? How does that change the relationships between them and what they can do and what the organization now can do as well, because they can start to exploit these interconnections? What's interesting, though, is that while most folks, almost 90% of the folks out there, look at business as a connected kind of organization, as a way for people to get things done as teams, as groups, less than 20% of those folks also think their company does a good job at that. And that's a big issue. And it's not because the people aren't trying, and it's not because the technologies aren't there, it's because the tools that bring those technologies to bear are failing us. That's not what they've been designed for. So going forward, you're going to look at an organization where you're taking things that have existed in the past, all that legacy stuff. You're taking all of these new technologies, you're taking all of this new capability that's sitting out there in people's hands, whether it's on their desks, in their tablets, on their phones, within the organization itself, as you start to tie together suppliers and vendors and consumers and everybody in the chain that has to make that organization successful. You're putting that all together into this big kind of collected consciousness, so to speak. When you do that, you have to sit there and say, what's going on? What's keeping me awake at night? And what is it that I have to worry about? And it's funny because if you kind of think about that in real life based on your own personal life, there's an awful lot of stuff that's unknown, and the pace of change has been huge over the course of time. The past 20 years, we've had enormous changes in technology, and yet if you look at the survey results of what's keeping CIOs and CEOs in our industry awake at night, almost none of it's about technology. It's not about the technology that's keeping people awake. It's not about the technology that's going to have an impact on folks. It's what do I do about the people? And how the people work with all of this stuff, because the technology doesn't do us any good. This is not an issue of, oh, geez, I just need a new silver bullet and I'll solve all of my organization's problems. I'll solve all of the industry's problems. We have to focus on the people side of the house that says, how do I bring together these things, these trends, and how do they interact with the people that I've got out there? So it's not standalone what's happening in the Internet of Things that says, oh, by the way, how are you going to deal with an organization that's connected to your organization through sensors in the boiler systems in your building? It's not that. It's now what are your people going to do about that? Are you going to use that to be able to do, for instance, risk control activities that you never could do before? Are you going to underwrite differently as a result of being able to see that? Are your people going to be able to understand what those functions that they can now leverage from all of this technology that's coming together can do for them? And that's kind of what's keeping most folks awake at night. And it's a very people-based issue, which is kind of funny because typically you look at it and technology is where we have those issues. But if you look at somebody like Google, huge company, and we're all sitting here in the P&C industry saying, what's the big deal? They're getting in the insurance industry. They've got a pile of money and they've got really smart people. And what happens when you bring smart people and a lot of money together? Bingo. Change. Something is going to change. You don't know what's going to change, but the status quo isn't going to cut it. And yet, as an industry, we tend to lag behind what happens when people take technology, like a company like Google, and marries it up with people who are really excited about what they're doing and try to bring together some new solutions. And that's what's happening out there. And we're not responding really well to that so far. And so if you look at it, how do we approach this? How do we fix that issue? How do we address it? What are we going to do about what's coming down the pike? So if you think about it, a good idea is, something that you're going to sit down today and you're going to work with today, you're going to try to implement. But what you want is that great idea. You want that idea that's keeping you up at night. You want the passion of what is it that's going to be the next big thing, right? Not necessarily I'm going to rewrite the way insurance industries work, or I'm going to change fundamentally how we approach our jobs. But there are areas within the organizations, areas within the way we do our business that we can make some fairly substantial changes to as a result of the connectedness of what we're doing together now. And it's something that we haven't actually kind of expressly looked at before. It's always been kind of in the background. It was this came along with the ride as we're doing something else. But it's starting to take the forefront. This is where the industry is going to have to start to pay attention to things, because the technology is driving people's expectations about how they live and they work. So what we're looking at is how does that impact insurance? And I think it disrupts insurance. It's one of these things that we have the potential to radically change the way we deal with the core mission of providing consumers, business owners, buyers with the protection of an insurance product. And so when we look at it, we have to go back to the mission. What is it that your job is as an insurance organization? You need to keep your customers satisfied. You have to optimize the premium and loss ratios so that you've got some profitability. And you need to improve the efficiencies of the organization now. We've done a lot to improve the efficiencies of the people. Let's now start to improve the efficiencies of the group. The problem with that is there are some easy solutions. You can throw money at consumers and they're happy, but that then impacts your profit and loss. And at the same time, as you're trying to make people work together better and more intelligently and more efficiently, we've got this big issue sitting out there in the corner. Folks born between 1946 and 1964 are the largest generation in the history of the country until the last generation. That generation we call that the baby boom generation. They're retiring. In fact, half of the baby boom generation has retired already. The other half are starting to retire. In fact, 40% of the property and casualty industry is going to retire in the next 10 years. And when they leave, there goes all of that institutional knowledge that forms the backbone of an insurance company. It's not in the systems because the systems don't have that intelligence. The systems are all about automating the task, about making it easier to produce an insurance policy, easier to create checks and print them or send them off to a claimant. They haven't been designed around how do I capture the intelligence that makes this company different from all other companies. That secret sauce is all leaving the building with that generation. And so what's your solution? How do you fix that? Well, you're going to fix it the only way you can, and that's with some new people. And those new people are coming aboard. The millennial generation, those 18 to 34, 18 to 40-year-old folks, are starting to really make an impact in the industry, in the world altogether, in fact, because they're now reaching those ages where they actually care about a career, they care about a job, they care about family and settling down and doing all those things that you typically associate with productive adult humans in our country. And that's what's happening. So you're seeing this. That population is now moving into positions of responsibility. Historically, we would have had folks in the intervening generation, those folks between, say, 40 and 55 taking over, because those guys would then have the next layer of the organization's intelligence, the next group of people who have embedded the institutional knowledge. The trouble is that group in this country was very small. It was one of the smallest generational in the country's history. And what's happened is, as a result, you had this huge explosion of people in the 1946-64 baby boomer generation. And they stuck around a lot longer, too, than most folks expected them to. So those folks in the middle never had a chance to take over. They never had a chance to develop those skill sets and develop become that next group of folks taking the reins of the company, so to speak. What's happened now is that they are now being displaced as well, because these millennials are such a huge population, they're going to start having that kind of an overwhelming people impact from a numbers perspective. The trouble with that is that these guys, by and large, have the attention span of a gnat. They just don't get the whole concept of let me sit down and study things and figure out, let me pass the exams to be a chartered underwriter or whatever else. They're just not wired that way. They are a very technologically connected group of people. They want things now. They have high expectations of technology and the way they interact with technology and with people as a result of that. You'll often see people sitting together at a table and they're talking to each other via text message. They haven't figured out that, in the old days, you used to actually open your mouth and communicate. But it's a process that works. And it's funny, if you look at this chart, the millennial generation, those folks between 35 and 44, 18 to 34, those folks are the first generation ever where technology was more important to them than things like their car, right? It's a fundamental change in the way they look at stuff. In fact, those 18 to 34-year-olds, any piece of technology, whether it's their computer or their cell phone, is more important than their car. They're just wired differently. That whole group of folks that grew up in the 50s and it was all about, living in the suburbs and driving all over the country and all that other kind of cool stuff, their priorities are different. If you look, the millennials as a group are different from the rest of the population as a whole, although there is overlap. It's interesting, 90% of millennials, the first thing they do in the morning and the last thing they do at night before they get out of bed is they check their email. They check their Twitter accounts. They check their social media, the Facebook. And it's interesting that an enormous number of people, when I'm talking to folks about this, in the older groups, in the baby boomers, in the missing generation in between, they're now doing that as well. It's really pretty interesting. I've only had one company ever tell me that they have anybody on their staff who doesn't have a cell phone. And they, in fact, had to tell the guy, we're going to give you a cell phone because we need you to be connected to the organization. But everybody has one now. What's interesting is that when you look at that group of people and they're sitting there with this very connected style of living their life, then look at what they know about insurance. Only 1 out of 5 will even admit to knowing something or even a lot about insurance. 80% of that generation knows almost nothing about insurance. And yet we expect them to take over the industry and run everything the way we've run it in the past. And it's just not going to work. They're moving, they're changing, they change the way they do their jobs. They live differently and they want to work differently. They want to work in a connected environment. They want to work in a connected space with other people, but they want that to be a virtual space. They want to be able to do that from anywhere with anyone. Some of those connections they have may not be obviously applicable to the job at hand, but they find those linkages that do, in fact, end up helping them solve a problem. And that's what we now have to start to address with our applications and the way we implement technology. So historically, we've been giving them systems that look like this. And this is what their reaction is. I have to be honest with you. It really is. My daughter looked at some of the stuff we've done and she's going like, what, are you kidding? I'm never working on that. And in fact, 40% of millennials will leave their jobs over the technology that they're using. You look at the competition, so you look at what they're doing. And if you look at it closely, these systems all look pretty much alike. They look like the systems we're delivering. We are all, as an industry, software vendors, generating pretty much the same application over and over for everybody who's going to be consuming it. And yet, we know that's not what these folks want to use. That's not how they live. So we went through last year and we said, how do I change that within our own organization? And we looked out, we came out with this brand new user experience design. We hired a company that specializes in this, and they said, this is the cutting edge of, Office applications. It's got great things like little chevrons to tell you where you are in the process. It's got little floating icons so that you can always connect to a note or whatever else. You've got this great functionality. It expands and contracts. It doesn't have a lot of tabs, so you don't have to move around the system a lot. And we're going like, yeah, that's really pretty cool. We ought to build this, right? So we went through an effort and we started to build that. And then I showed it to my daughter. And what do you think my daughter's response was? Well, that's not a whole lot better. That was her response. She says, that looks old. And I'm going like, come on, it's brand new. It's really fresh. But it doesn't matter. That's not the style of applications that people of that generation live with. It's not how they interact. And it's really not the kind of application the rest of us all live with either. When you think about it, on a day-to-day basis, 90% of your interaction with an application or with a technology or with a system is with something on a smartphone or a tablet that has a radically different style of use than the systems that we then deliver to the desktop. And so what do we need? We've got to have this better idea. If we don't come up with something radically better, we're just kind of dragging history with us. And we're not going to make that substantial change that's going to allow us to attract and keep the new generation of workers, which is required for us to be able to address those other issues that we have. Because if we don't address those other ones, it doesn't matter what the heck is going on out in the industry. Google can take over the whole world for all we're going to be able to do about it, because we won't have the people that it takes in order to be able to mount a credible counteroffensive, right? So you look at it, and what are we doing? We're doing something. We came back and said, we have to step back. We have to look at it, and we have to come up with systems that work the way people live. So if you live with apps, if you live with a device that's 4 inches, or you live with a device that's an 8 or a 9-inch tablet, and that's where you do so much of your stuff, then why don't we design our apps to work like that? And oh geez, if you happen to be on a desktop, we'll just make the screen bigger. We'll let you put more stuff on it. But we're not going to have this kind of a translation layer between this is what your stuff looks like at work, and this is the stuff that looks like for everything else you're doing. So we want to have you living and working the same way so that you're very comfortable with these things, because you will, in fact, work wherever you live. In the old days, we used to sit there and talk about this whole work-life balance thing. There isn't a work-life balance. Work is part of your life. Life is part of your work, and it's seamless the way people kind of do their jobs. At their job, they'll take a look at their Facebook posts. They'll see, oh, here's an alert, and they'll see what's going on with somebody they know. They'll look at one of those connections, what's going on with those connections. While they're sitting at Starbucks drinking a cup of coffee, they'll fire up their tablet and they'll check their work email. So there's this very blurred line, and it isn't this kind of distinction anymore of I go to work and I do work, and then I go home and I do my life. Now you're doing both all of the time. So we've come up with this concept called mobile up smart apps. We're going to design from the mobile side and move it upward in the chain. When we did that, we came up with some rules. We said 20% of whatever somebody does, they have to be able to do from their home screen, just like the home screen on their phone, the home screen on their tablet, the home screen on their desk now. They ought to be able to do most of the big chunk of their work right there. 50% of their transactions they have to do with one click. People have no patience. They don't want to be clicking through menus. They don't want to be trying to tab through or swiping through or whatever else to get to other places to do what it is that they want to do. And then there's probably 20% of those things that need another click. So you're looking at a situation where 90% of the activity that somebody is going to do to get their job tasks done are done within 2 clicks. That's an enormous change over the way we've typically designed systems as an industry. There are still, and I'll admit it, there are still some transactions that do not translate well to the small screen. That's that 10% though. And one of the failings of our industry is that we focus on those 10% transactions and we design our systems to handle the 10%, and as a result, all of the rest of the work we do ends up having that same style, the same look and feel, and it's huge densities. If you look at an application, for instance, Comcast, and you go onto their website and you look at all the stuff that they have, or in Amazon, and you look at all that stuff that's presented to you on the page and all the tabs and all the drop downs and the little ads and everything else that's going on that page, and you look at it and go, all I want to do is look up a book. And then you go and you look at what they do on a tablet or on a smartphone. And it's really easy. What's in front of you when you go to Amazon on your smartphone is a box that says search for something, because that's what I want to do. And for the first time ever, Google has more search occurring at the tablet and the smartphone level, at the mobile browsers, than they have at the desktop. Just occurred. Big shift in what people are using to do their work. So if we're doing that, if you look at that and you look at applications, you start to look at them across your experience, and you look at what shows up when you go to the website, and you look at the stuff that shows up when you go to your tablet, and you use that same application, that same company's stuff, you're trying to do the same thing. By and large, you tend to start to migrate more and more of your interaction with that company to the mobile device because it's easier. And that's really the key. It's the simplification of the applications. So we design our applications in a more simple, streamlined model for a tablet. We get to scale it up to a desk or scale it down to a phone, but it's the same look, feel, style, functionality across all the platforms. So no matter where you are, you're still doing the same kind of thing, and you're interacting with your application the same way. That's a huge productivity bit. The problem is, how do I take a really complicated business like insurance and say, I'm going to underwrite on a desktop or on a tablet. I'm going to adjudicate a claim. I'm going to investigate a claim. And the key is that we don't really do those kinds of complicated things. We do really simple steps, and we kind of squeeze them together into these larger concepts of investigation, negotiation, adjudication. But really, we're doing very small little functional transactions. We're setting a reserve, we're taking a statement, we're looking at loss runs to underwrite it, we're grabbing a report, we're documenting some conversation we've had. There's a lot of little transactions that go into these very large, complicated things that we call the job of an underwriter or the job of a claim adjuster or somebody else in the property casualty industry. So if we can break down that complex business into those simple steps, we can now start to create little widgets, little apps, just like on your phone, and we build a large system out of those widgets. And so we came up with 3 different kinds of widgets. We have these informational widgets, which take care of telling you what things are, what's the status, what's going on. That's about 20% of the work. 50% of those things are actually going to be done through these things we call process widgets. They actually do stuff. You can set a reserve, you can make a payment, you can change somebody's address on a policy. You can do something with those. And then there's these other 30% of these things that we call detail widgets, because those ones are the ones where I'm going to dive in deeper. And they may not, in fact, be ones that ultimately end up on a smartphone. They probably can be handled by a tablet, and they'll also be able to be available at the desktop. So you've got these different kinds of things and different objectives of what these widgets are, but now I start to glue them together. And what do they look like? So an informational widget is a little small snapshot. What's this policy look like? What are the coverages on it? Who's got it? It doesn't take a 21-inch monitor to show me what that policy's coverage looks like. Yet we do that. We will consume that today. It doesn't take 52 fields to pay a claim. Most times, I only need to know who I'm paying, what I'm paying it for, and how much am I paying it. Let the system worry about how it's going to go out and what the address is and what the bank account number is and everything else. Even when I get into the details, I don't need generally, most of the time, the level of details that we typically put together on a large desktop screen. We need some consolidated view of that, because that's that 30%, that 20%, 30% of the extra stuff. And then there's a few that need the big screen. And we'll deal with those few with something that's outside the widget model. So I want to take a quick look at what this actually translates to in terms of real life. I'll show you what it looks like on a claim system, in fact. So this happens to be a dashboard. It's just like your tablet, just like your phone. I want to create a home page. This is where I start when I start in my morning. And you look at it and you go like, well, geez, this is pretty cool. There's a little calendar thing about all my activities, just like the calendar I stick on my cell phone. I've got a little list of what my last assignments are. I've got some announcements from the company, what's the company care about. I've got some little charts and arrows that can tell me how I'm doing my job, etc. I've got this stuff that makes it easy to do work. And I can go in here and I can tell you when somebody calls me and says, hey, what happened to my check? I can click in the search box and put that guy's name in and the word check, and it'll show me what his checks are. I can say, aha, here it is. And I haven't had to leave this screen. My boss calls me and says, what are you doing about this claim? I can look at what's going on in my activities thing and say, I've got that diaried for next Tuesday to talk to the commissioner. I don't have to go into the claim, dig into the detail levels of that claim to find the diary entry that tells me what it is that's going on with that claim. I can do so many of my day-to-day, just normal routine, interrupt-driven kinds of activities right from the screen. Pretty cool concept. We also take that screen and we allow people to do whatever they want with it. They can move things because they may not like this format. They may want something else on their desk. They can do that just like you can do that on your phone. You can move stuff on your phone, you can move stuff on your tablet into folders, into your home page, so that you get to do work the way you're most comfortable doing work. When I get out of that and I actually go to the detail, now I can look at something like this. Here's the claim desktop. So for a specific claim, what's it gonna look like? Well, now I want to know what's going on with that claim. So I have a little claim snapshot. I can see the latest thing. I can see where I am in the process of handling that claim. I also have a little snapshot, a little informational widget that tells me what the policy coverages are, right? And I can take a look at the stuff and go, hey, this is all pretty cool, but it's not enough. And that's right. But just like on your smartphone or your tablet where you can swipe to another field, to another screen, you can do the same thing here. This single screen isn't enough for somebody to do all the job of handling a claim. So what do I do with the rest of the stuff they need? Well, it's just like a tablet, just like their phone. They can swipe to the next screen. And so they swipe over there and you can see other widgets that they have available for them. Pretty cool stuff, right? It's really neat. They can create those, they can move them around as to which things are their priority, and they can tailor their work to the way they live and work. And so I can take this now, I can go to Starbucks, and I can keep track of what I'm supposed to be doing today while I'm sitting there having my coffee, while I'm waiting for my sandwich to come, and I can say, aha, I'm supposed to pay, Joe $50 because he had a tow claim and we didn't reimburse him enough, and I've got this other bill that just came in my email. So I can just do that right here, right while I'm sitting there at my table, not at my desk. And I can get that thing done. What about those other ones? What about those other transactions? I'm going to pay 5 different bills, and I want to put them all on the same check. I want to have, line item details that say, I'm paying your towing bill, I'm paying for the stay overnight at a hotel because you were on a trip and you were interrupted, you couldn't go anywhere because your car was broken or your car was in an accident. I'm going to pay the rental car fee, and I want to package all that stuff in a single payment. Well, that's when I click on the header, just like your tablet. You push your finger on top of something and it explodes into a bigger thing. And so now that payment widget turns into a large detail payment widget, where now I can put in, these are the 7 line items that I'm doing. These are, for instance, the dates of service if it's for, I'm paying a doctor or something for a bill. I can do that now just by clicking with my finger once. And whether I'm on a desktop and I click with a mouse, or I'm on a tablet and I click by poking my finger at the title bar, it's the same thing. There aren't a lot of buttons, there aren't a lot of instructions on how to use the application because it's just like the way you work with your other applications. You don't get a manual that tells you how to play Angry Birds. You didn't get a manual that tells you how to use the calendar that's on your phone. it was intuitive enough, it was easy enough to explore. The tasks you were doing with it were small enough in nature that you could figure it out by just doing it. And that's how our systems are designed with going forward. Pretty neat stuff. And we customize those based on whatever kinds of claims you're doing. So this claim desktop is all about an automobile loss. This other claim desktop over here is what happens for a workers' comp adjuster. They have different issues. They have medical management that they have to worry about. They're worried about things like utilization of drugs by this patient as he's trying to get better. There's all sorts of other things in here that have no relevance to the auto guy. So we're not going to bother showing that stuff to the auto insurance claimant guy. He doesn't need to know it. He's not going to see it. The worker comp guy doesn't care anything about the collision details or what happened when vehicle 1 struck vehicle 2, because that's not part of what his job is either. So we tailor those things by individual for whatever role they're playing. And we further tailor it by the device they're using. So that if I have a device that is large, the system says, aha, he's on a large screen. I can put more stuff on there. He's defined these 7 things to put on it when he's got a large screen. And he's defined these 5 things to put on it when he's doing it from a smaller screen. And he's defined these 2 things to put on it when he's doing it from a really small screen like a smartphone. So we take care of that customization so that everybody can create the things that make their own operations more productive, and by definition, because of that, the entire organizations. And as a result, we go back to that whole thing about the chief insurance officer's mission. What's he looking for? He's getting that customer satisfaction. He's more able now to balance the profit and the policy and claim experience, the premium and the loss. He's recaptured the intelligence that was sitting out there in the people that are leaving. We have to embed that in the systems by virtue of making the system simpler. Because I've made all of these tasks into little easy tasks, I've made the application simpler to use. I've also forced the system now to do things that people used to do. So I now embed that knowledge that I otherwise lost. As a result, I've increased the efficiency of the entire organization. Because not only am I getting this value for any individual in the organization, I'm getting it for all individuals in the organization. Everybody in the organization is as good as the best person in the organization. And that's huge for us. So what do we think is coming as a result? We think we've just taken Dad's Oldsmobile and we've turned it into the kid's Tesla. Because really, that's what we want. We want that new, we want that passion, we want that energy, we want that thing that grabs them and says, come to work here, make this place your home. And we as an organization are reacting to what you need, and we're giving you this because you weren't going to drive the Oldsmobile. As a result, we're taking it and we're saying, how do I now kind of tie all this together and create that connected enterprise? What you have to do is you take the flexibility of some of new application designs, of the people that are using those applications, and the processes within your organization. All cool, flexible things. Tie them together with the ability to work on things now, when you need to, when the thing that causes work to need to be done occurs, somebody can jump on it. You get that agility. You need that agility as an organization. You need that agility from your technologies. You need that agility from your applications, the systems that embed that technology, that are trying to react to the flexibility needs you have. And while you're doing that, you can't help but becoming innovative. Because if you're not innovative, you can't figure out what those answers are in those other 2 categories, because everything still looks like an Oldsmobile to you. Everything still looks like, effectively, an old-style mainframe green screen system, which is really what our applications are today. A little bit more color, no buttons, no PF keys, but by and large, our applications today have substituted things like tabs and slider controls for all of the stuff that we all used to hate 30 years ago when we were trying to make a migration out of green screen, mainframe-based computers. We need to get into this new environment that allows us now to connect people in all sorts of different ways with people in all sorts of different places regardless of what their real task is at a point in time. Give them the tools they need when they are able to work on it, and give them those tools where they are able to work at them. And then don't create these kind of cliffs where, oh, I'm in the office, I'm going to have to assume a different persona, and I'm going to work in a different way. That doesn't work. This works. The interconnected enterprise works. And that's where we're taking technologies. What the detailed technologies are, nobody's going to know for sure. I don't think it's a flying car. We're not going to be flying around the country. But there's an awful lot of stuff that we already have today that we're building on that we can connect together better. And when we connect it together better, we're all going to be more efficient. Thanks.